Hello, 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 y'all. I am fortunate enough to be here today with Mr. Frankie Russo. Frankie, who are you and what are you doing here?
Who am I? I'm still figuring that out, but I'm here today because you wanted to talk to professional speakers that have done TED Talks and whatnot. And I'm an entrepreneur who's, I guess, about 25 years into entrepreneurship. So, what do I talk about? I've had a lot of different lives in my careers, but I sold my tech company after being Inc. 500 8 times. I sold that about 2 years ago. Thank you. So that I could do my real calling, which is helping organizations unlock growth through continuous innovation. And that's my real passion. And I do that through a framework called Love Your Weird. And loving your weird is actually all about bringing your inner child to work so that you can unlock the authenticity, imagination, and generosity needed to continuously innovate.
Awesome. So, for you, along the entrepreneurial career that you had, building your own tech business, at what point over that 25 years did you realize, you know what? Speaking is my art. Speaking is what lights me up. Speaking is what gets me going. When did you realize that?
Yeah. So for, I guess, the first 10 years, I probably was, focused on how I can use speaking just to grow my business. And it was 2011 that I did my first like keynote that wasn't for business. It was, well, it was kind of for business, but it was for Apple Inc. And we had created this brand campaign and some different things that help these small, what I call challenger brands compete with Best Buys and stuff like that. We were working with the Apple specialist division, and I went to New York to do that talk. And that was really the first time I realized, okay, there's something here. And about 3 years later, I started working on my first book, which was called The Art of Why. And it was not really about my business at all. I mean, I talked about my journey as an entrepreneur in it, but it was really just about unlocking purpose in your life. And so that was when I really started to do talks that had nothing to do with my business. And so I kind of had these parallel worlds for the last, I guess, what is that, 10 years, where I was doing talks and I was running these companies. And it wasn't until 2 years ago that I, was able to sell the company, which gave me enough runway to really just be a keynote speaker. I do some advising, but it's mostly around companies that I invest in. So I'm a private equity investor as well, which I've found is actually closely related, the relationships of these businesses that are looking for real experts to come in and help their organizations survive. Like the latest thing is obviously AI is changing everything. So a lot of the conversations are around how the framework applies to artificial intelligence and the roles specifically of humans as we transition through the next 3 years.
Awesome. And so it sounds like you've got kind of your positioning as a speaker pretty solid right now. And of course it's still evolving. Was At what point did you kind of get to that, oh, Frankie is a speaker, this is what he talks about?
Right.
When did you kind
Yeah.
of get to that
That's
point?
Yeah. So for me, honestly, I feel like I didn't get to that point till a couple of years ago, because for a
Okay.
while it was just like I'm a recovered drug addict, alcoholic, and that's been 16 years. And I have this whole journey of having unlocked these kind of more personal components of transformation. And so originally it was a lot of that type of stuff that I was translating into my own experience for my books. And so I talked a lot about passion and purpose. And, in a lot of cases, it was how to turn that into profits. And that was fine. But I felt like I was talking a little too vague, maybe a lot too vague for a long time. And that was keeping me from being like really useful. And, speaker agencies, bureaus, event buyers, it was too generic. And so it wasn't until a couple of years ago that I really honed into like, what is it that I'm really good at, that I talk about and that I can give in an hour to a group that can help them create some transformation. And really what it boiled down to is that, yeah, under a hierarchy of everything I do is purpose driven, which essentially is helping others, especially when you get the opportunity to do that without taking score, and just the beautiful payout and profits that come from that go beyond money. But that's super high level, right? And it makes you feel good. I wanted to make sure that I left them with a combination of making them feel a certain way, but also think differently and then know where to go with their actions. And so as I really peeled that back, and it's a very grueling process to do that and still be inspiring. I think where a lot of people, it's hard to marry those two worlds, right? You've got like the very tactical, you got the workshop, you've got the coaching and consulting type world, and then you've got the keynote world, which is this blend of the two, where you need to give real insights. It needs to have some meat on the bone, but you're still entertaining. And the slot that we get for keynote speeches in general is usually like in the middle of like a day, 2-day or 3-day conference where there's a lot of mind-numbing, highly technical stuff being thrown at everyone. And so you have to balance the two. You can't just be a motivational speaker.
Right.
You have to be an expert, but you also have to balance those components. So that's been the journey of the last 2 years. Love Your Weird kind of came from an unsuspecting place. I had gone through a divorce, and this was 2017, 2018. And so it was inside of me, and I realized that I had lived this inauthentic existence. And that was when I really started to connect with the relationship between authenticity as it relates to purpose and authenticity as it relates to innovation. So as those kind of crossroads happened, I started to peel back, like what was the guts of what made us unique. So for example, I had multiple companies, but it wasn't until I got into technology and started using, well, let me back up for a second. So when I was 5, I wanted to be an inventor, astronaut, a cowboy, and a TV preacher all at the same time. Okay, so that's my weird. So when I talk about Love Your Weird, it's like, what was Ryan into at 5 years old? And we'll maybe drop into that here in a second. But essentially, I believe that is a picture of what we give up, that gold that we lose, that many times people who are frustrated or stuck or not realizing why they don't feel like they can be creative and imaginative anymore. They're not innovating. A lot of that, they're not passionate. It's stuck between that 5-year-old and the adult self, and the stuff in between is what's blocking it. And the more we can go back to that, actually is the essence of what's missing, usually individually and collectively in our cultures. And when we're sitting here trying to figure out why are we not being able to innovate or grow, it's because we're doing the same things, expecting different results. And it's because we're not giving ourselves permission in most cases to show up as our authentic self, to show up with ideas that might not be that good, but not be judged, and to create a culture where everybody's working together, even if my idea is not the one that was chosen. That's the spirit, right? That's how you create a culture that these things are born out of innovation. And so anyway, I started doing that with the last company that I sold. I was able to sell it because we brought all that together. So we invented a tech product. This was the first time I'd really been in technology. So I bought a tech company. We invented a tech product that was machine learning, early AI. And then you combine that with a culture of 100 people that were all aligned around this idea that we're going to have everyone can show up their own brand of weird. And everybody was part of the innovation team. It wasn't a siloed, like one team was creative, one was innovation, and everybody else is sales and admin and HR. We brought it all together, and it created this incredible company product experience that 60x its growth in 3 years, made us the fastest growing company in Louisiana in 2020. And then in 2021, we were able to exit to a Fortune 500. And so that's been like a culmination of 25 years to get to that framework. And so now what I do is I go into companies that are stuck or trying to grow, sometimes starting up, but really the companies that are stuck, they want to continue their growth or they want to re-unlock their growth. That's really where my expertise lies. And what I have found is that this framework, when you can create a culture of those 3 components, authenticity, imagination, and generosity, that's the real raw ingredients it takes to start unlocking that. And so I take them through a journey of, first and foremost, getting honest, because a lot of where we can't even really start until we get honest about the problem. So yeah, so that I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. And more from a tactical perspective, let's say I'm a 40-year-old guy, and I'm, really deep into the rat race, the corporate culture, or into something that I've been doing for decades now.
Yeah.
And maybe I've kind of lost touch with that 5-year-old me of that, truly authentic soul. How do I tap back into that?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that I do as we're going through the keynote is illustrating the true non-negotiable value of tapping back into it. So once we've established that, let's say I am 40, and the only kids I've thought about are my own kids. I haven't really thought of what I was into. So first and foremost, it starts with remembering and then sculpting out like kind of what was that kid into? Maybe not, we didn't not necessarily what did you want to be when you grow up? What were you doing when you played make believe? What did that look like? And so a lot of times what just that process of relooking at that. And then what happens next is that as I start to just for fun, workshop this concept that I've got these issues at work just for fun. How would my 5-year-old self solve those? And so what it is, it's about changing the mindset going into things that we assume a 5-year-old cannot solve. But sometimes what it does is it takes us on a journey of looking at things from a different lens. Because the thing about a 5-year-old that, there's a lot of negative things about a 5-year-old, temper tantrums, emotional, don't have a lot of knowledge. But now that knowledge is moving from this thing that was always the most powerful component, but now it's fully commoditized and an overabundance of knowledge is available on demand with AI. So I believe that this next wave of reskilling that is everyone's talking about, that's absolutely required to not be left behind, is going to be finding ways to reinvigorate that imaginative part of us and that part of us that is open to all possibilities. Because now with AI, there are all possibilities. We don't really know what the future holds. So it's that spirit of walking into it with like, all right, look, I don't know, which is what a kid usually doesn't know. And also, I believe that things that are unimaginable are possible, right? And so that's really what it's about. It's about changing the way that I approach these things and then playing games like what if, the budget or what if the client request or whatever the thing is that we feel like is the blocker wasn't an issue, what would we create? It allows us to go deeper into the ideation process and have more freedom around the creativity. So it starts with, okay, what was that kid into? And then how would he solve this problem? And it might be ridiculous, but that's what I'm saying is that like a lot of the best things that we need to do as far as creating a quote novel idea is by getting a little more into the ridiculous.
Love it. That's awesome. And it's cool. One thing that stuck with me was when you said, remember what you would do when you were 5 and you said, let's play make believe. What
Mhm.
did you invent? Right. And that was interesting. For the speakers out there, you obviously having, experience growing, buying and scaling an ML and AI company, how are you going about growing and scaling your speaking business
Yeah.
differently than your tech company?
So not that differently. So I'm using machine learning and AI to help me. So what I do is I am very, very involved with early AI, and I use AI to help me as team member. So the biggest thing about the speaking business is it doesn't have the as high grossing volume of revenue, right? So like my previous companies were 25, 30, 40 million dollars in revenue. So I don't have that much revenue to play with. So I had to figure out how do I create teams without revenue or resources. And luckily, the last 2 years, I've got those. I've got teams of hundreds of people that are invisible, that are AI. And so AI has been a huge part of helping me scale this business as well. I use a lot of, one of my favorites is Claude. I don't know if you messed with Claude yet, but with Claude, I can bring in both of my books. I bring in transcripts of all my talks. When I do a new talk, my TED talk, any interviews I do, podcast, all of it. And so now I've got this team of people that are connected to the consciousness of an infinite number of other consciousnesses. And that's what I'm working with. So it's really good content when you know how to create your own space where it's feeding off of your stuff. So I have the luxury of having a lot of content going into this. So I'm not trying to use the AI to create new content. I'm using the AI to curate new content, right? And I've augmented my world with the machines, which by the way is a lot of what I'm talking about in my speeches and in my talks and in my advising is that like augmenting for a world where no one's left behind. And so again, so I'm part of it is that I'm using these tools at the same time as part of my work. And obviously, communication, it's incredible for communication. It can communicate like me. So as far as outreach goes, to speaker bureaus, event people, call for speakers. I mean, call for speakers and proposals are typically a very cumbersome process. And so that has become a lot more nimble. And so, yeah, so I use it a lot, not to mention the ways that it's being used on the social media platforms that promote me that as AI I didn't build.
That's awesome. How you mentioned something very interesting about leveraging machine learning for speakers bureaus outreach and all that, lead generation and prospecting. What does that look like from the
Yeah.
professional
So,
speaker
so
out there
first of
perspective?
all, yeah, great question. So now the chat is connected. So I use a combination of multiple tools, right? So, but chat's one that's great for prospecting because it's connected to the internet and it can help me identify events that I can't see, targets. It's great for identifying the targets and then even curating some of the messaging that I would give to that target based on the messaging that's been put on that target's website. So that's one great way that we use it. And I think that's the more personalized things are, and especially like, for example, if you're trying to go after a new industry, like I got a request the other day for a talk for the mining health and safety convention, right? And so it's like, all right, mining and health safety. So I'm not a miner. Are you a miner? Have you ever been in a mine and done the mining thing? Yeah, right. So I need some help from my friends as far as like having some context around it. I'm not changing my whole talk, but I want to have some context on like what are the problems that are happening right now. And I want to make sure that, let me see. You lost me for a sec, or you good? Okay, good. So I pushed the wrong button. I want to have context around that because one of the things that I'm talking about is problem solving. Essentially, innovation is just a modern version of problem solving. And so, what I'm doing is I'm going in and showing them how to problem solve differently to unlock growth because they all have the capacity to unlock the growth and not be disrupted like a lot of the other companies have in the past. And what is the more likely prediction at this point that a lot of these companies will get disrupted, but all of us have the capacity to not be disrupted. However, solving the problem in a new and innovative way, that's really the work that I do. So I want to make sure that I understand their problems at least at a high level before I even ever talk to them. So from a research standpoint, it's critical going into conversations with buyers who a lot of times even the buyers don't understand the industry. And so I think that you have to almost do, and you also want to be careful not to over assume that just from the research I have that I truly understand the full context. So that's where like there's still a lot of stuff that I don't use AI for. For example, like the face-to-face pre-calls that I think are critical for nailing the context. I'm a big promoter of personalization, customization. And that, again, that doesn't mean rewrite the whole talk. What that means is we're going to ensure that we've got context with what we're saying and we're not coming flat-footed or like not with at least an empathy for what the audience is going through right now.
Sure. And for those people out there that are making the balance between working with speakers bureaus and tactically using their own tools to land their own speaking gigs, what tips and advice do you have for that person that's between those two?
Okay, so you were saying between what the people that are like just kind of up and coming?
Sure, and they're getting their own gigs from the kind of outreach that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Apply to speak, and then also, hey, should I work with the speakers bureau? I'm not really sure how that works. The people that
Yeah.
are dealing with that question.
Yeah. So first of all, if you can work with the Speakers Bureau, it's always great. Speaker bureaus are excellent. So I am a partner with an organization called Impact 11. And Impact 11 is a community of speakers, all shapes and sizes, some that are more up and coming. Impact 11 was founded by 4 speakers that are just A-list speakers. They know all the bureaus, they're friends with the bureaus. We get together once a quarter, and honestly, a lot of bureaus are there. And the purpose of it is not primarily to meet bureaus, it's actually to learn from them. And then also we do these master classes once a quarter. And I've found that the best way to grow the business is to get to know other speakers. Like the best thing you do is get to know other speakers, get to know people in the industry. Bureaus in general, once you have enough demand and you want to think of bureaus as people that are going to manage demand plus add some fuel, but not just create it. So there's this misconception kind of like the music business, where if you get a record label, all of a sudden you're going to be famous. And the truth is that, the bureaus have the ability to help you tremendously, But usually when the timing is right, they kind of already know who you are because they're seeing and hearing about the work that you're doing. So you can miss the boat by going too early to a bureau. The main thing that you want to be thinking about at the stage you're talking about is, am I getting spin from my talk? And if not, why not? And I can tell you without even seeing your talk, it's because the talk's not good enough. So that's where your head always has to be at. How do I make a product that's so good that they can't not talk about it, that they can't not want to tell their friends about it or ask me back? And that's the journey we're on. So like, no matter how good your marketing is, your AI is, your branding and all that other stuff, at the end of the day, you just have to be good. And if not great, to be someone who is consistently booked, where people just your batting average is just so high because you've done the reps, you've done the talks, and there's not a risk involved with hiring you.
Awesome. Well, I know we've got a hard stop in 1 minute here, so I'll ask you, is there any last piece of advice you have for the aspiring speaker, the professional speaker, or the business owner that's using speaking to grow their business? And then where can we
Listen,
find you on the internet if we want to hear more from you?
So all good. Easy to find me on the internet. Just Google Frankie Russo, and I'm the guy who's not the bald Jersey radio host. So you should see me at the top at frankierusso.com, all that fun stuff. Anyway, so that's how you find me. So all those out there that are aspiring, first thing you need to know is that this is a marathon. There is no sprint involved. Okay, that's the first thing you need to know. Secondly, you do belong in this space. You do belong, and there is enough. There is enough. It's a $4 or $5 billion industry. There's enough for everyone, and you absolutely do belong. And I would say that you just make sure that what you talk about is what you're truly passionate about, and not just talk about what you think is the trend. Talk about something that you truly have credibility and truly are an expert in, and that you believe in enough to where you would talk about it for free, even though you're going to get paid to do it.
Awesome. Well, Frankie's over here dropping a lot of value, and I know you got to hop, so we will wrap it up here. And I thank you all for listening. Cheers, Frankie. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me.
Bye.